We see the world through stories, through films, books, headlines, photographs, memories, and myths. But every story has another layer, one that's often forgotten, overlooked, or deliberately left out. Welcome to Behind the Curtain. Let's take a closer look. What if one of your clearest memories never happened? Not because you forgot, not because someone lied to you, but because your own mind quietly rewrote it. Imagine remembering watching Nelson Mandela's funeral on television in the 1980s, remembering the news coverage, the speeches, the crowds, only to discover that none of it ever happened. Nelson Mandela did not die in prison. He was released from Victor Verster prison on February 11, 1990. Television cameras captured him walking hand in hand with his wife Winnie. Thousands of people lined the streets. 4 years later, he became South Africa's first democratically elected president. He remained one of the most recognizable political figures on earth until his death on December 5, 2013. The historical record is unusually complete. There are speeches, photographs, televised interviews, entire documentaries. There is no uncertainty about what happened. And yet, thousands of people remember something completely different. Not vaguely, not as a feeling, as a memory. They remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison during the 1980s. They remember watching the funeral on television. Some remember speeches, some remember newspaper headlines, some remember discussing his death with their families. Every one of those memories is false. In 2009, a paranormal researcher named Fiona Broom discovered she wasn't alone. At a conference, she casually mentioned remembering Mandela's death in prison. Several strangers immediately agreed. Not only did they remember it, they remembered many of the same details. Broom later wrote about the experience online. She gave it a name, the Mandela Effect. The internet did the rest. Within a few years, thousands of people were comparing memories that reality insisted had never happened. The Monopoly Man, Pikachu's tail, the Bernstein bears. The internet began offering explanations: parallel universes, alternate timelines, reality shifting, quantum glitches. Perhaps people argued they really did remember another version of history. It's an extraordinary idea, and like many extraordinary ideas, the real explanation turns out to be even stranger. Because the Mandela effect isn't really about history, it isn't about reality, it isn't even about memory. It's about something much deeper. It's about why evolution built a brain that remembers the world the way ours does, and why perfect memory would actually make life impossible. One person misremembering something isn't surprising. Thousands of people misremembering it in exactly the same way feels different. It feels impossible. But the strange thing is that it happens constantly. Not just with Nelson Mandela, with brands, films, songs, history, even our own childhoods. The question isn't why people forget. The question is why they forget in the same direction. The answer begins with something the brain does every second of every day: prediction. Your brain is not a camera. It never has been. A camera records every pixel that enters the lens. The brain doesn't. It can't. Every second, your eyes receive millions of pieces of visual information: colors, edges, movement, faces, text. If your brain stored every detail exactly as it arrived, the amount of information would be overwhelming. Instead, it compresses. It searches for patterns. It keeps what seems important and quietly throws the rest away. Most of the time, you never notice, because the brain is remarkably good at guessing what belongs in the gaps. Imagine you reading a sentence. You don't analyze every individual letter. You recognize whole words, entire phrases. Sometimes your brain even predicts the end of the sentence before you've reached it. Memory works the same way. It stores meaning more often than detail. Psychologists call these mental shortcuts schemas. Schemas are internal models of how the world usually works. What a classroom looks like, what a doctor sounds like, what a birthday party contains. They're incredibly useful. Without them, every new experience would feel completely unfamiliar. But schemas have a weakness. When information is incomplete, they fill in the blanks, sometimes correctly, sometimes not. Take the Monopoly Man. Most people remember him wearing a monocle. He never has. So, why does almost everyone add one? Because the brain already has a template for wealthy gentlemen from the 19th century: top hat, suit, large mustache, walking stick, monocle. The Monopoly mascot matches almost every part of that template. The missing monocle isn't noticed consciously. The brain simply completes the pattern. Not because it's careless, because pattern completion is one of the most efficient things the human mind knows how to do. The Bernstein Bears follows a similar logic. The surname is spelled Berenstein with an A, but Steen with an E is vastly more common than Stain. Your brain encounters an unfamiliar name. Instead of preserving every letter precisely, it stores something close enough. Later, when you remember it, the most familiar spelling quietly replaces the original. Not because memory failed, because prediction succeeded. Just a little too well. Even famous movie quotes aren't immune. When Darth Vader reveals the truth in Empire Strikes Back, he doesn't say, Luke, I'm your father. He says, No, I'm your father. But outside the film, people almost always add Luke's name. Why? Because quotations rarely exist in isolation. If someone simply says, I'm your father without context, you don't know who's speaking. Adding Luke makes the sentence instantly understandable. Over decades of conversation, parody, and imitation, the clearer version replaced the accurate one. Eventually, millions remember the edited version instead of the original. Not because anyone lied, because culture itself rewrote the memory. The memory no longer belongs to the original event, it belongs to the culture surrounding it. And once enough people remember the same mistake, it starts to feel like evidence. But shared confidence isn't the same thing as shared truth. That's where memory becomes even stranger. If memory simply stored patterns, perhaps that would explain why people misremember logos, or spellings, or movie quotes. But it doesn't explain something far more disturbing. Can a memory change after it has already been formed? For most of history, people assumed the answer was no. A witness saw what they saw. A childhood memory was a permanent record. Remembering meant retrieving information that had already been stored. The 20th century would dismantle that belief almost completely, and the person most responsible was a psychologist named Elizabeth Loftus. In 1974, Loftus and her colleague John Palmer invited volunteers into a laboratory. The participants watched footage of a car accident. Nothing unusual. Afterward, they answered a simple question: how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? A second group was asked a slightly different question: how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Only one word had changed: hit, smashed. That tiny difference produced a measurable effect. People who heard the word smashed estimated much higher speeds than those who heard hit. That alone was interesting. But the truly remarkable discovery came a week later. The participants returned. They were asked another question: did you see any broken glass? Many confidently answered yes. There was only one problem: there had never been any broken glass. One word had quietly rewritten the memory. The experiment became one of the foundations of modern cognitive psychology, not because it showed people could forget, but because it showed that remembering is not a passive process. Every time you remember something, you reconstruct it, and reconstruction leaves room for change. Imagine taking apart a jigsaw puzzle every time someone asks to see the picture. You build it again, you show it to them, then you take it apart. The next time, one piece goes back in slightly differently. Perhaps another piece is missing. Perhaps someone hands you an extra piece from another puzzle. You rebuild it again. From a distance, it still looks like the same picture, but it isn't. Human memory works remarkably like that. Loftus spent the next several decades asking an uncomfortable question: if a single word can change a memory, how far can that process go? The answer turned out to be much further than almost anyone expected. In one of her most famous studies, participants were told that as children they had once become lost in a shopping mall. A family member supposedly remembered the incident. Researchers described it in detail. They asked participants to think carefully. Did they remember it? At first, most said no, but after repeated interviews, something extraordinary happened. Many began remembering it, not vaguely, vividly. They described the shops, the panic, the stranger who helped them. Some even recalled conversations that had never happened. The event itself was entirely fictional. The memory was real. Since then, researchers have demonstrated similar effects again and again. People have developed memories of spilling punch at weddings they never attended, being hospitalized for illnesses they never had, meeting fictional characters at theme parks, even witnessing crimes that never occurred. The human brain is astonishingly good at creating coherent stories, especially when those stories fit with everything else we already believe about ourselves. This has had enormous consequences outside the laboratory. For much of the 20th century, eyewitness testimony was considered one of the strongest forms of evidence available in court. Someone saw the crime, they remembered the crime, case closed. Today, the picture is much more complicated. Modern legal systems increasingly recognize that confident witnesses are not necessarily accurate witnesses. Stress changes memory. Leading questions change memory. Repeated interviews change memory. Media coverage changes memory. Even hearing another witness describe an event can quietly reshape what we believe we saw ourselves. This phenomena has a name: memory conformity. People who witness the same event often leave remembering remarkably similar stories, not because they all remember perfectly, but because they gradually influence one another until their memories converged. Memory, it turns out, is social. Think back to the Mandela effect. Imagine someone confidently tells you, "I clearly remember the Monopoly man wearing a monocle." You aren't certain yourself, so your brain searches. It finds the top hat, the mustache, the formal suit, and suddenly the monocle feels right. The suggestion slips neatly into the pattern already stored in your mind. Days later, you no longer remember hearing someone else's claim. You remember the monocle as your own memory, not because your brain is malfunctioning, because this is exactly how human memory evolved to work. It constantly combines experience, expectation, emotion, and information from other people into a single story that feels seamless. The remarkable thing isn't that memory changes, the remarkable thing is that we almost never notice it happening. And yet, there is an even stranger question. If memory is this unreliable, why would evolution build it this way? Why wouldn't natural selection simply give us perfect memories? The answer is unexpected, because perfect memory turns out to be far less useful than we imagine. If memory changes, if it borrows, if it edits, if it fills in gaps, then the obvious question is why? Why would evolution build something so unreliable? Surely remembering the world exactly as it happened would be better. It sounds obvious, it also turns out to be wrong. Imagine remembering every moment of your life, not the highlights, everything, every breakfast, every stranger you passed on the street, every conversation, every awkward silence, every mistake you have ever made, every insult, perfectly forever. It sounds like a superpower until you realize your brain would never stop replaying it. There is an extraordinarily rare condition known as highly superior autobiographical memory, sometimes called hyperkinesia. People with the condition can remember astonishing amounts of their own lives. Ask them a random date, March 17, 2008. They may tell you what the day of the week is, what they ate, who they spoke to, what the weather was like, what they were wearing. It seems impossible, almost magical. For many years, scientists assumed these people must possess the ideal human memory. Then they began interviewing them. Many described something unexpected. They couldn't stop remembering. Old embarrassments returned with the same emotional force. Arguments from decades earlier felt fresh. Grief never softened in quite the same way. Painful memories remained vivid. One participant described it as living with an endless movie that never stopped playing. Another said forgetting sounded like a gift, because for the most of us, time edits memory. For them, it barely does. Memory isn't simply about storing information, it's also about deciding what can safely be forgotten. Every day, the brain throws away extraordinary amounts of information, not because it's failing, because it's filtering. Think about yesterday. Can you remember every face you passed, every advertisement, every leaf on every tree? Probably not, because none of those details matter. Your brain quietly discarded them, not out of laziness, out of efficiency. Neuroscientists increasingly describe the brain less as a storage device and more as a prediction engine. Its primary job isn't preserving the past, it's preparing you for the future. To do that, it doesn't need perfect recordings, it needs useful patterns. If every dog you've ever encountered barked before running towards you, your brain doesn't need to remember each dog individually. It remembers the pattern. Dogs bark. Running dogs deserve attention. Pattern recognized. Future prediction improved. That's a far more efficient survival strategy than replaying thousands of individual encounters. Artificial intelligence offers an interesting comparison. Large language models don't memorize every sentence they've ever read. They learn statistical relationships, patterns, probabilities. Human memory appears to work in surprisingly similar ways. Not identical ways, but similar principles. We compress, generalize, predict, fill in gaps. It's one reason we can recognize a face we've only seen once, understand a joke we've never heard before, navigate a city we have visited years ago. Our brains aren't archives, they're a forecasting system. This also explains something else. Why forgetting often feels frustrating but is actually essential. Imagine walking into a supermarket. If every shopping trip you have ever taken arrived in your mind simultaneously, finding the milk would become almost impossible. Useful memory depends on ignoring most memories. Psychologists sometimes describe memory as selective attention stretched across time. What you remember is often simply what your brain believes will be useful later. Everything else quietly fades. The neuroscientist Daniel Schachter famously described what he called the seven sins of memory: forgetting, absent mindedness, misattribution, suggestibility, bias, persistence, and transience. At first glance, they sound like flaws, but Schachter argued something remarkable. Many of these sins exist because memory evolved to be flexible rather than perfect. The system that allows you to imagine tomorrow is the system that occasionally misremembers yesterday. The ability to simulate the future depends on the ability to recombine pieces of the past. You cannot have one without accepting some imperfections in the other. Which brings us back to the Mandela effect. Perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking why do people remember something that never happened, perhaps we should ask what kind of memory system would naturally produce that mistake. And the answer is one designed by millions of years of evolution: a memory system that values usefulness over precision, meaning over detail, prediction over preservation. And that system has served our species remarkably well. But something changed in the 21st century because our memories are no longer shaped only by our own experience. They are being shaped by millions of other people at the same time. And that may be the real reason the Mandela effect seems so much more common today. The Mandela effect didn't begin with the internet. People have always misremembered things. Stories have always changed in the retelling. Rumors have always spread. What the internet changed was the speed and the scale. Imagine misremembering something in 1955. You might mention it to your family, perhaps a few friends. If someone corrected you, the mistake ended there. Today, the same memory reaches millions of people in minutes. A single post, a short video, a discussion forum. Thousands of strangers suddenly discover that they all remember the same thing. For the first time in human history, our memories have become networked. Psychologists have a concept called memory conformity. They've already seen it happen between small groups. Two witnesses discuss an event. Without realizing it, their memories slowly become more alike. Now imagine that process happening online, not between two people, but between 2 million. One person confidently says, "I swear the Monopoly man had a monocle." Thousands reply, "So do I." Suddenly, uncertainty disappears. Confidence grows. Not because the new evidence appeared, but because agreement feels like evidence. Social psychologists have studied this effect for decades. When we are uncertain, we naturally look to other people. If enough people appear confident, our own confidence rises too. This is usually helpful. It's how cultures preserve knowledge. It's how children learn. It's how societies function. But it also creates an unexpected problem. Large groups can become confidently wrong. Then there are algorithms. Unlike conversations around a dinner table, the internet doesn't simply show us information. It selects information. Posts that generate strong reactions travel further. Surprising claims spread faster than ordinary ones. A post saying you've all been spelling this famous brand wrong your entire life is far more likely to be shared than a post explaining why memory reconstructs experience. The algorithm isn't trying to deceive anyone, it's trying to maximize attention. The Mandela effect happens to be exceptionally good at attracting it. The result is something researchers call an information cascade. A few people make a claim, others repeat it. Media outlets report that people are noticing, and YouTube videos appear, podcasts discuss it. Soon people encounter the incorrect version more than the correct one. Eventually, the repetition itself becomes evidence. After all, how could so many people possibly remember the same thing incorrectly? The answer is surprisingly simple because they learned the memory from each other. This has happened throughout history. There are famous historical events that many people remember incorrectly, famous quotations that were never spoken, photographs remembered differently from how they actually appear. The internet didn't invent false memories, it industrialized them. There's another reason the Mandela effect flourishes online. One of the most powerful human experiences is discovering that other people share something you thought was unique. It creates belonging, identity, conversation. People enjoy solving puzzles together. The Mandela effect feels like one enormous collaborative mystery. Every new example invites participation. I remember that too. So do I. What if we're all remembering another timeline? The community becomes part of the experience, and communities naturally build stories together. This doesn't mean everyone discussing the Mandela effect is irrational. Quite the opposite. The people fascinated by it are often doing something deeply human. They're trying to explain an experience that genuinely feels impossible. Imagine remembering something vividly, discovering reality disagrees, and then finding thousands of strangers who remember exactly what you do. Parallel universes suddenly seem less absurd than accepting that your own mind quietly edited reality. That's how compelling memory feels from the inside. Philosopher Daniel Kahneman once observed that our minds prefer coherent stories over uncertainty, a complete explanation that feels better than an incomplete one. I crossed timelines. I slipped into another universe. History changed. These explanations satisfy something emotional. Accepting that memory is messy, that certainty can be misplaced, that even our most vivid recollections are provisional, is psychologically much harder because it forces us to question something even more fundamental than reality. It forces us to question ourselves. And maybe that's the secret of the Mandela effect. Not that reality is unstable, but that certainty is. Which leaves one final question. If memory is constantly changing, if it is shaped by culture, emotion, prediction, and the people around us, can we really ever trust what we remember? If you made it this far, you might be wondering whether any memory can be trusted at all. If memories change, if they're influenced by language, by other people, by the internet, then what does that leave us with? The answer isn't despair, it's perspective. Because memory was never designed to be a courtroom transcript, it was designed to help you survive. Imagine two early humans walking through a forest. One remembers every individual tree, every leaf, every branch. The other remembers only one thing. The last time we walked through a place like this, there was a leopard. Which one survives? Evolution rarely rewards perfect accuracy, it rewards useful accuracy. The details fade, the lesson remains. Memory doesn't preserve the world, it preserves what your brain believes matters. That is why memories are so deeply tied to emotion. Think about your earliest childhood memory. You probably don't remember an ordinary Tuesday. You remember the first day of school, a birthday, a frightening accident, a family holiday, the day someone died. Emotion acts like a spotlight. It tells the brain this matters. Remember this. Everything else quietly fades into the background. But emotion has another effect. It doesn't just strengthen memory, it changes it. Every time you tell a story, your brain reconstructs it. The version you tell becomes the version you remember. The next time you remember the telling, not necessarily the original event. Over years, a memory can drift surprisingly far from where it began. Not because you're lying, because your brain has been editing the story with every retelling. This is why siblings often remember the same childhood differently. Who's right? Sometimes everyone. Because they aren't remembering the event itself, they're remembering the meaning the event acquired over time. Historians understand this better than almost anyone. When they reconstruct the past, they rarely rely on a single eyewitness. They compare letters, diaries, photographs, government records, archaeology, newspapers, multiple independent accounts. Because memory, even honest memory, is evidence, not truth. The same is true in science, and increasingly, the same is true in law. Perhaps the strangest consequence of all of this is what it means for identity. Who are you? The obvious answer seems simple. You're the sum of your memories. But what if those memories are constantly changing? The story you tell about your childhood today isn't exactly the story you told 10 years ago, nor is the story you'll tell 10 years from now. Your past isn't frozen, it evolves. Not because history changes, because you do. Each new experience quietly reshapes the meaning of everything that came before it. In that sense, memory isn't just recording your identity, it's continuously writing it. There's something oddly comforting about that. We often imagine forgetting as loss, but forgetting also makes healing possible. Embarrassment fades, grief softens, old failures become lessons instead of wounds. The brain doesn't simply remember, it lets go. People with highly superior autobiographical memory have often described this as the greatest burden of their condition. Nothing fades, nothing loses its emotional weight. Every painful day remains vividly present. For most of us, time is also a kind of editor. and sometimes that's an extraordinary gift. The Mandela effect was never really about Nelson Mandela or the Monopoly Man or children's books. It became famous because it exposed something we usually never notice: the remarkable confidence we place in our own minds. We assume that remembering feels like replaying. It doesn't. It feels that way. Those are not the same thing. Perhaps that's why Mandela effect fascinates us so deeply. Not because it suggests reality has changed, but because it briefly allows us to see the machinery behind our own thoughts. For a moment, we catch the brain doing what it has always done: compressing, predicting, editing, reconstructing, quietly rewriting the past, so it can better prepare us for the future. Forgetting isn't a flaw in the human mind, it's one of its greatest achievements. Memory was never designed to preserve reality exactly as it happened. It was designed to preserve meaning. And perhaps that's the strangest part of all, because every version of your past exists only as the latest reconstruction your brain has created. There is no untouched archive, only the story continuously being rewritten. The Mandela effect is often presented as evidence that reality is unstable. The truth may be stranger. Reality is remarkably stable. Memory is beautifully, endlessly human. Every story leaves something outside the frame. Sometimes it's a forgotten person, sometimes it's a missing chapter, and sometimes it's the part that changes how we understand everything else. If this story surprised you, imagine how many others are still waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, stay curious.